Hi, Amabel. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I know Ryan is a little bit tired tonight. He's a hardworking guy. He was power washing today, so but he brings some great questions that I forget to ask. So we're all here. We're glad to talk to you. I've been really excited about this one because you make some really cool games. And I have this one behind me. I
see that, yeah.
We're going to talk about games. We're going to talk about maybe some of your game design philosophy and so forth. But as an introduction to people who don't know, Amabel is part of Hollandspiele with her wife, Mary. And they're in Detroit. And Amabel has designed over 50 games, games like Iberian Gauge and Irish Gauge, and This Guilty Land, and war games, and just tons of stuff. Amazing output, especially in this last year, though. You've just been, I think all the time you've just been putting out tons of games. So we're super excited to have you on the show. And that's why I was hoping Ryan would wear his suspenders tonight, because we talk about train games sometimes, even though we don't play train games. So thanks for being here. Anything else that you want to say about yourself as an introduction before we get into talking about games and game design and game experiences?
No, I think that about covers it.
Okay. How's Detroit doing? What do you have a favorite restaurant up there?
I haven't been in a restaurant since 2019, so no, I'm not sure if I have a favorite restaurant necessarily. Would go to different restaurants back in the day.
I only asked that because my wife and I we visited Detroit in 2019 and went to a baseball game, and there are some fantastic vegan and vegetarian restaurants in Detroit. That's why I asked, because we don't eat meat, and anyway, I just didn't know if you had any recommendations. So Iberian Gauge is hitting shelves now. That's a pretty cool game. Let's just start with that. Why? Because you've talked about this elsewhere. I didn't include this in the ones I sent you this morning. But why did you decide to design another 3 to 5 player train game in the midst of a time when it is hard to get together groups like that?
Okay, right now? So the answer to that's really simple. I designed that game in 2016, and it came out in 2017 originally through Winsome Games, and then was licensed to Capstone. So that's fine. Now I have a game coming out later this year that's 4 to 6, so I have no excuse for that. And in 2019, the last game we released was Westphalia, which was a game for exactly 6 players. And I'm so very glad we released it in 2019. If it had come out just a few months later, it wouldn't have sold.
Right.
It would have been a massive flop, massive boondoggle. So I'm glad we got it out when we did.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's the one I remember seeing you writing something about recently. That you were like, if it had come out in 2020 or 2021, that would have been a big mistake.
Yeah.
Large families would have loved it.
Oh,
very specific large families, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah. Daniel, if you're listening, who likes to make his kids play games with him that are long and tedious. No, I don't think your games are long and tedious. Actually, quite the opposite. My 13-year-old and I, we just recently picked up The Fields of the Cloth of Gold. I'm gonna mess up that name. Is that
The Field of the Cloth of Gold? Yes.
Yeah, The Field of the Cloth of Gold. Every time, because of the articles, I feel like I'm saying it wrong. But my 13-year-old and I played that, and he asked to play it again immediately. Like we played it four or five times that night that we got it, because he really enjoyed the tug of war and what was going on in that game. So how do you come up? How are you so prolific? What's some of your what's some of your game design philosophy?
Well, I think those are kind of two related but different questions. How I'm so prolific.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, is I'm doing it full time. And that's a massive difference. Back in the day, when I was still working a day job, I would have to squeeze in design, development, playtesting into a few stolen hours on weeknights, maybe on the weekends. So maybe I work 7, 8, 9 hours on games a week, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And now I work 12, 13, 14 hours a day on games, 7 days a week. So that's a lot more time, and you can accomplish a lot more when your time is your own. And of course, since it's what keeps the roof over our head, that's also an incentive to keep working. So that's a big part of why I'm as prolific as I am. Now I have work habits which enable me to work more quickly. One thing that I tend to do is I tend not to actually start working on a game, start putting it together, until I have a very clear idea in my head of what the game is, what it feels like, what it looks like a complete picture. And then I just work on the game until it resembles that picture. I test it to confirm that it conforms to that picture, or that picture is worth conforming to. It might change. Things do change. But so it's kind of like a pre-visualization element, which enables me to work a lot more rapidly. Whereas there are some designers who, they'll be changing the rules every 2 or 3 days, which drives the playtesters crazy. And I've done that sometimes, and I got out of that habit because it burns out people, and it wasn't conducive to getting games out there. First selling games when I was freelance, and then getting games out there as a designer and publisher. I guess also falling into that is that my games do tend to be smaller and more focused in scope. So, for example, there are a lot of games on the American Revolution in the war game space. I think I'm the only person who's done a game on the role of logistics in the American Revolution. And so that specific focus, it excludes a lot of things, a lot of avenues I don't need to explore, because I have a particular thesis I'm expressing, a particular thing I'm exploring, and I can focus on that, and it already narrows the scope of it, which enables me to work more quickly. And I guess just trying to make games that have some kind of thesis, not necessarily a message, but have something to say and are trying to say it with the game. I guess that's a design philosophy. I'm not sure, but it does enable me to be fairly prolific. I'm not prolific as I used to be, because I used to just be like a workaholic, especially early on. I was very hungry for getting games out there and trying to get something that would be a hit, something that would stick. And once I found something that did stick, where it did resonate with people, I was able to slow down a bit more with that. And then part of it too is I would work as a way to distract myself from questions about myself that I've recently found the answers to. So at that point, I'm no longer using the work as an emotional crutch. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, do you enjoy the work more now then?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the work before too. Don't get me wrong, but I've always enjoyed the work, and I think if I didn't enjoy it, I don't know if I'd be doing it. I mean, you hear from a lot of people who say, once you make your hobby your job, it loses its sparkle or whatnot. But that hasn't really been my experience. I really have like the best job in the world. I'm the luckiest girl in the world, and I'm just gonna embrace that,
Yeah. What? Correct me if I'm wrong, but originally you wanted to design more of like a Euro economic based type game. Is that right?
That's right. That's what first got me to the hobby, were those sorts of games, and that's what I thought I was going to do. And those were the first games that I designed, and they never got anywhere. I think partially, I was kind of wet behind the ears. I hadn't quite learned my craft yet, but partially as well, I think it was that I was kind of a good 9 or 10 years behind the times. Like the games I was coming up with, they would have been great like 99 or 2000, not so much in 2009, 2010 when I was trying to pitch them. And when I did my first war game, I thought, well, I'm going to do this as a fluke, as for giggles. Well, I'm going to really be a serious midweight Euro designer. That'll be what I'm really doing. But I'll do these war games or even train games as kind of a side thing. And those are the things that sold, and then the Euro games never did. So I just kind of shifted. Well, this is what I'm doing now. I just kind of focused to what worked. I mean, really, that's kind of why I shifted to board games in the first place. Because before I found board games, I tried a lot of different methods of creative expression. Like Mary and we made feature films. I designed, and I don't want to say programmed because I'm a terrible programmer, but I made video games, comic books, all sorts of things, and nothing ever resonated with anyone. And I was just trying to find the thing that worked. And board games worked, and particularly these kind of board games. That's where I could potentially make a living at it. And eventually we got there.
You're sparking a lot of questions for me personally. Because feeling like you need to have a creative outlet is really important. I think for everybody. Everybody finds it in different ways. Why? I guess I'm trying to think through for someone who has made films and comic books and everything else. How do you connect the narrative that you're telling now? I mean, some of them it's very blatant, right? Like in This Guilty Land. Others, it's a little more subtle, like reading through The Field of the Cloth of Gold. How do you feel about? I don't know really what I'm asking yet because I'm still thinking through it. Sorry, but how do you feel about that? I mean, you've already said it's more rewarding for you personally, but how do you feel about telling the stories that you tell in this format? Because it could be easy for somebody. I think this is what I'm thinking through. It could be easy for somebody to just pick up the game, play the game, and not think about the story that you might be presenting there. Have you ever thought about that at all? How does that make, like, are you okay with that? Just by the fact that they played your game, or what's your goal once somebody gets your game in their hands and plays it? What would be the ideal situation?
So that's going to vary wildly from game to game. Like something like The Field of the Cloth of Gold, while I think there is somewhat subtly a critique, as it were, of the times, which I make more explicit in the design notes. It's really there under the surface, and it's really a lightly themed Euro, is what that is. Whereas in This Guilty Land and other of my kind of political or message games, it's much more about engaging with that history. And some people will fail to engage with that. And I don't know. I'm you ask me on different days, I'll have different answers for how comfortable I am with that. because on the one hand, I can't say, well, someone has to get this out of my game and they have to, relate to this thing, but I don't want to say something like that. But on the other hand, there are people who just will refuse to engage and like to even entertain the idea of engaging with it. And that just drives me nuts.
Yeah.
I remember when we announced this Guilty Land, we had because we announced that very early, much earlier than we usually do. And that's because we knew, given the subject matter, that we really had to be very careful about how we framed the game and how we really had to control the narrative, as it were, of what the game was and what it was not. Because if we let other people do that, people could act in bad faith and distort the game. And that would be irresponsible. So of us to allow that to happen. So we announced it very early, had a cover reveal very early. And there were some people, particularly like Euro gamers who are really into the Euro games, who just said, well, you just took this game and you slapped this theme on it and you could have picked a different theme. And no, it's really about engaging with this theme, expressing this theme. It could not be anything else. You could not re-theme it successfully to about anything else. And that kind of refusal, that kind of bothers me when I run into that. But I also understand that it's a different way of looking at games because people come from a more Euro games are math, games are puzzles perspective instead of a war game or a history gamer perspective where it's about making an argument and modeling something. I mean, they're kind of just contrary ways of looking at the games.
Yeah, right. Simulation versus the puzzle. Yeah.
And I think one reason why it bothers me when that happens is if you look at how a work of art is saying something without looking at what it's saying, I think that's not responsible, really. I remember in film class in high school, the teacher would show us different films, and like he would show us Birth of a Nation, which is not a film they still should be showing to kids in high school. Yeah. Even back then, I'm old and ancient, but it was really like he was trying to divorce all the repugnant things that film was saying from the camera work and the editing and whatnot. Just look at the camera work and the editing. Don't look at what it's actually about. And I think if you look at games as these are just mechanics, when is a game that's trying to do something more serious? Oh, these are just mechanics without looking at what it's saying and how it's, what it's expressing. I think it's that same kind of impulse, and you can't. It's just dumb. I don't know. It's dumb, and I think in some ways it's not moral. Like you can admire the beauty with which something is expressed or constructed, I guess. But if what's underneath it is ugly, I don't think it's worth it to admire that beauty. Does that make any sense? Or am I just rambling?
No, you're saying a lot of important, really good things. I mean, these things are at the forefront of kind of the heart for board games in some circles right now. And I think it's very, very important to say these things. So I appreciate you saying it so well.
I would say on that, for some games with heavy themes, I agree 100%. I think that there are players that have not experienced heavy themes. And I also think that there are people that are unwilling to experience that. But you take a game like Splendor and you look at the theming and it's just not there. I feel like if somebody sat me down and was like, let's check out Birth of a Nation as a cinematography, I feel like they're just like really saying, hey man, you should watch Birth of a Nation.
Yeah. And it's not worth watching.
But no one's going to say that about, like, maybe they would say that, like, Transformers, like there's some board games are Transformers. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there's some games there's nothing thematically under the hood, Yeah,
absolutely. Like, I've done some train games, and if you look at the history of trains as a historical phenomenon, it's the history of like the exploitation of labor and the destruction of land, and train games don't really engage with the moral cost of that. And because they're kind of abstract exercises in mechanisms and route building and economics or whatnot. And it's weird because I'm perfectly willing to be critical of games that don't seriously engage with their theme, or they use a problematic theme, but I don't have that same impulse to say that about train games. And then that's a blind spot on my part that I need to interrogate, or I don't know. It's a complicated, thorny thing, and everyone's lines are drawn differently and very personal.
I didn't even think about that with train games for like some of our recent podcasts about like discursive rhetoric or whatever of and rules representing slavery or different concepts. And we never even brought up train games, but all train games use kind of, man. I'm putting my suspenders away now.
But don't you think? I don't know. Here I'm gonna. This has been an already very interesting discussion that I wish we could talk a lot longer than an hour. But don't you think that part of that is that a train game? So because we can make Martian rails, right? Which does exist, about doing the same sorts of things that you're talking about abstractly and using the same types of mechanisms. You can even, what's the fantasy version of it that a lot of people liked, but in fact they prefer it, of the
Dragon Rails, Iron Rails.
Yeah, Iron Dragon, is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. But so we can take the mechanisms and the those sorts of things and completely go somewhere else, so it's not exploited. Is the word exploitative? Is that right? I'm going to say it wrong. But maybe that's part of the reason, versus like, it sounds to me like, and if you want to talk about this more, Amabel, it sounds to me like when you designed This Guilty Land, the mechanisms within the game and the way that the game played out was specifically chosen to tell that story.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, okay. to engage with that theme, to model something, to make an argument. And that was all very intentional, because I don't think you could do a game anywhere around that theme without actually having a point of view and expressing it and engaging it mechanically. And I think there's an onus to do that. And you might be right with that might be why the railroad games don't invite the same scrutiny, because it can be kind of shifted to, well, this could be Mars or wherever, this could be outer space.
They're grandfathered in too from just like the design of them. Like they're way older than any. Like, I'm not saying that that's like that can't change. I'm just saying that like there's train games that are older than me. You know, and they did not address any social issues.
No, absolutely not.
Even though they're called Rail Baron.
So
and train games, are inherently, gonna get kind of radical here. They're inherently, capitalist, and capitalism is bad. But it's something that's in a lot board games and kind of is given a pass. And maybe it's because just the nature of the board games, and they're fun exercises. And maybe 10, 20 years from now, they'll be like, oh, why were we playing that? Just like, in the war game hobby, there's all sorts of games. A lot of them tend to be more about kinetic warfare. So about just the movement of units and the clash of one body against another. But there's certainly a tendency earlier in the hobby for folks to sometimes fetishize the bad guys. And there's just like reckoning of that going on now, where there wasn't as much previously. So, as we grow as a society, we tend to ask more questions about that and about our entertainments. Same thing with, I love movie musicals. Love them. They're great. And there's a musical, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, which is phenomenally shot and danced. And boy, is it sexist. Boy, is it not something like, it was family entertainment at the time. I don't know if I'd want it to be family entertainment now,
Yeah.
And part of enjoying that kind of art is recognizing that and reckoning with that.
So my real question at this point is, when are you going to design the PBS licensed version of Dinosaur Train?
You're not the first person to ask that. Who is your favorite character in Dinosaur Train?
Oh, Mr. Conductor. He's such a
Mr. Conductor.
There's Shiny, Buddy. But who's
there's Tiny and Don.
Don's my favorite.
Don's my favorite too.
Okay, Don's my second favorite, but I just, Mr. Conductor's great because he takes them on adventures and makes sure they're doing all right, and is kind to everybody. So
I think it's unlikely we're going to get the license for Dinosaur Train.
Right.
But we do have a Dinosaur Train game that Mary and I are working on together, called Dinosaur Gauge, which should be coming out next year, I think. Is it next year, Mary? Yeah, it should be coming out next year.
Oh, man.
And that's about, dinosaurs building railroads and shipping goods and running factories and fun time.
All aboard.
I feel like there should be just like some, not trying to tell you how to make your game, but if I were to ever add to that an expansion or something on my own, I feel like there has to be like a dealing with the dinosaur poo too, because all the poop that's out there. I mean, because that, whenever I think of watching
that almost made it into the game because it's a pick up and devour game.
Yeah.
But we have not been able to work in the excrement as of yet.
I'm just saying, when I think of watching Jurassic Park, I always think of that scene with the Triceratops, and
I just think of Jeff Goldblum.
All right. So what are some of your favorite experiences, whether in Euro games or other? I mean, do you play party games at all, or?
I have played party games. I don't want to say under duress because that sounds snobbish, but I don't seek them out. But I'll play games with people. There's very few games where I would say, "Oh no, I don't want to play that." I'll humor people mostly. I mean, I don't want to play like Cards Against Humanity or something like that. That's where I'll kind of draw a line. But as long as it's not too long, if it's like an 8-hour game, I'm not going to say, okay, whatever.
But well, have you so when you were referring to like late 90s games, is Caylus a game that you enjoy, or?
No, I haven't ever actually played Caylus.
Okay.
So, but some of the games that I really enjoyed, some of the first ones that we got when we got into the hobby, El Grande, Tigris, Euphrates, Catan is fine. The robber shows up in a lot. It's almost like 7 comes up a lot on 2d6. And those were kind of the Euro games I was kind of attracted to and trying to emulate. And I think I've done that a little bit. I mean, it's not 1-to-1, but the kind of somewhat more Spartan and meaner decision space, I think, is present in Field of the Cloth of Gold. So that's kind of the kind of Euro game that I really dug. And I think part of, I don't really play the Euro games anymore. I tend to just play stuff I'm working on, really. And part of that is war games is what works for me. And part of it is like the really complicated mid-weight, heavyweight Euro games with all the little bells and whistles. It's just a lot to go through for not a lot of oomph for me,
So what game right now gives you that kind of experience right now that you enjoy that's not one of your games?
I'm trying to remember the last game I played that wasn't one of my games, because I'm basically playing games most days, and they're usually minor ones that we're working on.
Sure.
Gosh.
You're allowed to say Shadows in the Weald if it is your own game.
I have not played Shadows in the Weald in quite some time, because that came out. When did that come out? Was that 2015, 2016?
2016, I believe.
2016, yeah. That was a huge flop. That was really disappointing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, it was a gigantic flop. So I was working for a magazine publisher as an editor of the magazine, actually, at that time.
Okay.
And early on, the publisher asked me, "Can you do a fantasy game?" And I said, "Sure." And that the result was Shadows in the Weald. And no one bought it. And so it just stopped. And I also did a science fiction game around the same time, which was a high-speed hover tank, which was about hover tanks moving at high speed.
Was that Tiny Battle Publishing?
Yeah. Oh, and I believe Mary's indicating that she loved high-speed hover tank. Was that meant, Mary? Okay. Yes.
I almost bought that at Gen Con 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah, so they're both out of print now. It was the same publisher as the magazine, but at the time, the publisher was being ran by day-to-day operations and whatnot, was being run by Mary.
Okay.
And that's really me working on the magazine, her working for that other company. That's where we kind of learned the craft of game publishing, especially print-on-demand publishing, which we then took those lessons and applied them when we started Hollandspiele, where we looked at what worked if we're going to do that, looked at what we thought maybe could have been done better. I said, let's do it better, and we've done that. So, but yeah, high-speed hover tank, also a massive flop. And at that point, I was like, I'm not going to do anything that's not a history-based game anymore. Because I try to do fantasy, I try to do science fiction, and no one comes. But that might change, because I next year probably going to be doing kaiju table battles. That's kind of science fiction, so that might work. We'll see. I think also at the time, no one knew who I was. I mean, I had like 15, 20 games out, but none of them really got traction other than some of the train games, and those hadn't been picked up yet by the larger publishers. So I did 5 games for Winsome Games. And if you're unfamiliar with them, they came in like plastic clamshells, and you'd pay like $150 for 3 games that were basically, I don't want to call them prototypes, because the publisher once said, don't call them prototypes. If most prototypes are much nicer than these. And you're gonna get our customers' hopes up. So that's where I got any kind of traction, and none of those had been licensed yet at that time, so they didn't really resonate with people. There are games now, like if I release a game now, is going to do better than it would 5 years ago or 10 years ago, just because I have some kind of reputation to trade on, which I didn't have then. Really, that works for us as a company as well as for Hollandspiele, because there are games that we released in 2016, 2017 that didn't do as well as we had hoped. And I'm pretty sure if we release them now as new releases now, they're still been in print all this time, but they're new releases now. We have such a larger customer base to draw from that we would have sold more copies.
Yeah.
I just want to say I am a huge fan of chit games. I don't get to play a lot, and I think that looking at historical gamers and chit players, I think there's like maybe me and Christopher's brother-in-law who I forced to play games with that like fantasy or sci-fi chit games. But I'd like to imagine that I'm the bellwether, and that's going to be it is going to be a ripe time, because people are going to be like, this is what I want, and because that's what I want, and I think what I want is what really everybody should like. So
yeah, So let me tell you a couple other things about Shadows in the Weald and High Speed Hyperthink. First, they're out of print now because I have the rights to them, and maybe we'll do something with them. There was a point like 2 years ago where I was in talks with a company to make Shadows a miniatures game. That didn't work, which that's fine. I don't know if I want a miniatures game, but so there probably is some interest in it. I think the publisher at that time, their audience wasn't a match for that material. And we run into that with Hollandspiele too, where there are games that we love and we want to get out there and we get them out there, and they don't resonate with our audience. If another publisher had done them with a different audience, not even necessarily a bigger audience, but a different audience, those games would have resonated a lot more, sold a lot better. And I think that was kind of the situation. And the last thing I'll say is that Shadows actually was like a super important game for me. And here's why. Originally, it was much bigger. Like it wasn't designed. It was designed for a small footprint, but it had like the map was twice as big, twice as many characters, and then right before it was going to be published, I was asked to cut it in half. So I had to cut the heroes in half. I had to go down to one 11 by 17 map. Just had to radically constrict it. And I think the game suffered from that. And so I was working with the artist directly, who actually was the boyfriend of a friend of ours. And the artist and I took very seriously the need to have greater diversity in the characters. It's a lot of fantasy games. It's not as much now, I think. I think that is changing. But at the time, a lot of fantasy games, it was just, white European. So we wanted something that was a lot more diverse. And we put a lot of effort into that. And when the game came out, the printer printed the game so dark that the darker skin tones just became like a muddy blotch with no definition. And it was very upsetting because we put all this effort to doing something that we thought was important. And for things out of my control, completely out of my control, it was ruined. And there's a big part of Mary and I saying, we want to have control.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be able to see what's being done. We want to be able to adjust the files. We want to be able to be responsible. And we can't do everything ourselves. We have vendors we work with. We have a printer. We have a different printer for cards. We have a German supplier of wood bits. We're not cutting the wood bits ourselves, even though we are bagging them ourselves. But we try to control as many aspects of it as we can so that we're ultimately responsible for what is put in that box and how that box looks. And that was so important to us. And that's kind of the lesson I learned from not having that control with Shadows in the Weald. So I wish the game had done better. I'm glad it happened because I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it was an important game in several ways for you.
I'm holding out for the reprint now, so.
Well, we'll get there eventually. The art budget's going to be the issue, but we'll figure it out.
And I mean, actually, that's what I was going to say is it is awesome that Ian O'Toole's artwork has been on some of your games. I think that has brought more people in. Just introducing to your games, I was talking to a friend, a different Daniel than the one I mentioned earlier, and that Daniel found out about your games because of Irish Gauge and then so forth through Capstone, and then that. And then bringing it back to Hollandspiele, which is your and Mary's company, art can really make a difference. I mean, this art is a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and there's a chance that might. I mean, that game was successful. There's a chance that it wouldn't have been. Essentially, the game was designed as a very expensive present for Mary because she liked dinosaurs, and so we. If the game hadn't gone anywhere, still would have been, we'd have lost the money, but that's what the money's for. As long as we're paying our bills, we can afford to take risks on things. We try to minimize those risks. Another game that we released was Escape from Haiti, which is a science fiction game. That's a solitaire science fiction game from a designer who's very good at those. So I think that, helped tremendously, but the art budget for that was several times what we usually do for games, and like it gave me like anxiety because it could have flopped, and if it did well, we still would have been proud to have done. We still would have enjoyed the heck out of the game and the way it looked and be proud of it, and because our models print on demand, which generally limits risk and the consequences of risk, because there's not really a lot of cash flow issues. Having a game that flops, expensive game that flops, isn't going to make us shutter our doors the way it would for a more traditional company. And for the same reason, things are disruptive for other companies. Like right now, a lot of companies are in a really tough spot with the way shipping costs are rising because they're producing overseas. And I understand it. It's much more economical than what we're doing. What we're doing is nuts. But
inspirational, I think, is what you're doing.
But it works for us. And it insulates us from those market pressures where, there are publishers right now who are trying to figure out, like, are we having games coming out in the next couple months? And we can just keep releasing games. So, I mean, we're kind of, it has its ups and its downs. It has its positives and its minuses, this way of publishing games.
Yeah. What's your favorite game that you've designed that you're playing right now?
I have a couple games that I'm finishing. I've just finished up the testing of that are coming out this year, and I'm really excited about them that I've designed. One is Nicaea, which is the 4 to 6 player game about the first ecumenical council. I kind of flippantly describe it as a stockholding game, but it's a bit more nuanced than that.
I saw you were throwing in some really good historical information on Saint Nicholas and the fact that Saint Nicholas probably wasn't there, despite what people like to do, and with that council. And so I've been following that one a little bit.
Yeah, and one's coming out a little sooner than that is The Grass Crown, which is the second game in the Shields and Swords Ancient series. And those aren't, the first one wasn't, it sold really well, but it's not a huge prestige game or a message game or something that gets a lot of eyes on it. And I don't know if this one's going to get many more eyes on it, but it's going to be the first game where the box has the name Amabel Holland on it, and that's important to me. So,
yeah, that's awesome. On that note, what would you like to see, or how would you like to see tabletop gaming grow in the next few years? I know things are weird right now. I just went back into the fact that I'm not going out a lot. You mentioned not going out to restaurants or anything. I haven't eaten in a restaurant since 2019 either. But just in general, whenever we can get back to cons and everything else, what do you want to see in the world of tabletop gaming? How would you like to see it grow and change in the next few years? Hopefully,
I'd like to see it grow in 1,000 different directions, because there's so many different ways for games to be and things games can express. Now, I'm particularly interested in games that make arguments and games that center observation of a model as a source of meaning rather than identification, rather than like, oh, you are this person, you're in their shoes. It's more stepping back, looking at the system overall, particularly as ways to express and identify the way systemic oppression works. So I want to see more games like that, but I also want to see all sorts of other games. Those are the kind of games I like to make. So that's why I want other people to take that and run with it. But I also want all sorts of other things, and I want to see all sorts of different people with different voices and perspectives getting into it. And I think that's starting to change. I like to see more publishers in kind of a niche print on demand space. Not that I want them kind of muscling in our territory, but it allows you to do things that you couldn't do in a traditional sense, and it allows for a greater diversity of voices and approaches, and that can only be a good thing. So I guess that's what I want.
Awesome. I think, I don't know, Ryan, did you have a question related to that print on demand and all that?
I got like an hour's worth of conversation about it. But I'm not. I might email you sometime, Amabel.
Okay.
Because your business model is one I've seen other publishers do, not explicitly the same, but it's just something I find back to capitalism and different aspects. There's the saying like there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. I'm self-employed because I have a hard time in things, and I want it to, and part of me being self-employed is not exploiting or being exploited. Like I don't work with other people, I don't hire people, and and having stuff made locally and then doing a lot of that stuff yourself I'm rambling, but that's just I got a big love for just trying to either, I don't know what your reasoning is. I'm putting a lot of I'm projecting a lot of reasoning that you self-publish the way that you do, but that's what I want to do. And everybody, obviously, if they did everything like I would, games and stuff like that, everything would just be better. So a lot of projection there.
Yeah. So briefly, a big part of getting into print on demand is that it enabled us to make games. People who did not have money, and were pretty risk adverse because we spent a lot of time living paycheck to paycheck and then missing paychecks and being terrified and not being people who can, at least at the time, and maybe do better now, but we couldn't really Kickstarter. We're not really people who can sell ourselves like that. And then being interested in doing things that are more esoteric and more argumentative and abrasive. And it's difficult to do that in mass quantities. So, and we're just, we don't make a lot of money. We make enough to keep the roof over our head and try to be kind. And it's ultimately what we try to do. Yeah, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. It needs to be dismantled. Dismantle the patriarchy.
I'm down with this. Supply chains, man, Christopher, come on. Just, I mean, I have a lot of love for all the publishers we've talked to, and I'm not casting any judgments on them. The supply chain for the stuff that I use professionally to keep a roof over my head is probably wrought with exploitation as well. So anyway, that got real heavy. I think the reason Table Battles Dinosaurs did so well, though, is because Anna has great taste. And so since it was a labor of love, that I haven't played it yet, so I'm just making stuff up. But it's probably because it was a labor of love and that expressed itself more fully, so people love the game.
Yeah, I think so. Because it really exists because Mary wanted it to exist. Same thing with the expansion that we just released, More Dinosaurs, Please. I mean, literally, Mary asked for more dinosaurs, please, and so I gave them to her. I
love that. I clicked on that one going through your BGG page earlier, and I was like, Mary wants more dinosaurs. This is an expansion. Okay. Yeah. I'm awful with names.
That happens sometimes. Ryan forgets names. Amabel, you have been a delight to talk to. We really appreciate your time.
Likewise.
Anything else you want to share about gaming or your gaming experiences or game design before we close out tonight?
No, I don't think so. I think that about covers it. Thank you for the conversation, for talking with me. It was nice to chat.
Yeah, I'm more excited than ever about your games. It sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. We will catch you later.
Thank you.